show today is a Bachmann switch. As you can see, it's wired up to the AC into a switch that controls one side, and as you switch, it switches. But this is cumbersome, and I'd like to change this out so I can automate this either with DCC control, or in my case, I'm going to use a PLC and a touchscreen that I have laying around, and I'm going to control my switches from a touchscreen. But to do this, I have to automate this little box. So let's look at what's inside this box. So the first thing you'll notice is on this box, if you flip it over, there's two screws. So let's go ahead, let's get a small Phillips screwdriver, and we're going to open this up. So here you see I've opened up the shell. There's a little circuit board in here with a switch. If you notice, this has on the back side 6 terminals for that switch. So what I propose I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this switch, which is a double pole, double throw switch, and I'm going to replace it with wires. And let's see how that will look. First we'll have to carefully desolder these. So here you can see I have a handy little device that holds the circuit. I use a fine-tipped soldering iron, and I carefully heat the solder. Be careful not to overheat it. And then I use a solder sucker. So as I heat that up, the solder sucker sucks up the solder. This is the best way to desolder them. So if you carefully desolder all these terminals, plus you have to also be careful, you got to desolder the two ends, which are not part of the terminal, but just part of mounting of the switch. But at this point, I can now attempt to extract it out, being careful. I may need to get a little additional solder out of there, but that should come out. Do be very, very careful. You don't want to rip this circuit, this tinned circuit underneath on the bottom side, so you have to make sure you carefully extract that. I may have to reheat these to pull the switch through. And here is the circuit board now, with the holes carefully taken out, and here you can see I've now removed the switch, so the switch is now out of it. So you can see on the circuit board there's no switch. And here I got it better in focus. So I've removed the switch. So what you'll see here is this circuit board, essentially what this is a delay timer, because the switch for the Bachmann EZ track is a dual coil switch, and we don't want it to stay on, as you will melt the coils. So what this circuit board does is it takes a signal when you activate the switch, which sends a power from this board out to the switch. So depending on which position the switch is, it will either be straight through or it'll cross over switch, diverting route. So at this point, what I want to do is I want to solder wires into these 6 holes. But note, on a switch, the center is common, and the 2 outsides is the 2 positions of the switch machine. So what I want to do is I'm going to color code my wires. I'm going to use a striped wire to indicate one side, but then I'll use black for the center, so stripe on one side, unstriped black on the other side. And then I'll use some more wire for a stripe on the top and a non-stripe on the bottom, stripe on the top and a non-stripe on the bottom. The reason I'm doing this is because I don't know exactly how this works in this circuit board, but it does appear as though they have 2 separate sides of the circuit. So I'm going to keep them separate for now because I'm not quite sure how this works, but you'll see how that works out on a relay when I hook this up in my final assembly. Sorry for keep shutting you down, but I have 2 hands and I got to do the work with 2 hands and one to film. So let me add some wire. And here you can see I've added 2 wires to it. By the way, you see the helping hands are a tremendous asset. You need these if you're going to try to do this fine soldering. You just got to hold the pieces. But let me unclip them. You can see the other side. So I've added the wire. You see I have the striped wire to the outside, and I'm going to do that for the other two ends of the wires. Now the important thing here is to remember, mark your wires or color code so you know which side is which. In the end, I don't think it matters because you can flip the green cord that plugs into this terminal to get the direction right. But again, try to keep your striped to one side so that we can keep the two sides of the switch separate. And in this case, I'm going to solder on the other 4 wires, and we'll see what that looks like. And here I've added some more wires. By the way, what I'm using here is just some small gauge speaker wire. I think it's like 18 gauge speaker wire. And the reason I'm using that is because obviously if you look at the wire size used for the power going into this unit, it's very, very small. So these are more than adequate. Again, I try to color cord. What I've done is I've labeled a 0 so I know which side is which. So I have these separated. Even though they're the same wire, I did correctly mark them. So now, take this and we're going to insert it back into our black case. We'll just put the wires through the holes into the case, lining up the spade connectors so they have their outputs right. And here's the completed case. So you see I got the wires hanging out here. So you're looking at this and you're thinking, big whoop, what am I going to do with this? Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to take and hook this up to a relay. But this relay is a double pole, double throw relay, and we'll show you quickly how we wire that up. So what we need to be aware of is which terminals are common. So there's going to be 2 terminals common, 2 terminals called normally open, 2 terminals called normally closed, and then the coil. Alright, here's a relay, and I just wanted to point out the wiring diagram for this. When I say common, common means the 1 and the 8 in this particular relay means that will receive that middle wire I was telling you about. So what you want to do is you want to make sure one side has a stripe, one side is a non-stripe. So I'm going to use my black striped, put it on the 1, my black unstriped, put it on the 8. The other 2 striped wires, 0 will go on a 4, and the other stripe will go on a 3. Normally closed means when this relay is off, 4 gets the signal path. When the relay is on, it's like I flip the switch and it's going to be 3. Same on this side, so my non-striped wire is going to go on 5 and 6. And then my coil is, in this case, 2 and 7. So on a relay, you can see that I wired up the wires, so the stripe will be on one side, stripe, and my stripe. And in this case, I hook up the relay to the wires. I add a little fancy covering there to hold all the wires together neatly. And then my black box. So let's hook that up to our switch. So here you can see the switch hookup is exactly the same. You put the green wire into the 3-prong, which goes to your switch mechanism on your EZ track. You still have your red wire going to your AC accessories on your power supply. The difference now is instead of a switch, we have a relay. So in order for this switch to function, I need to add power to this relay. And by doing so, I will turn this on to either switch it straight or switch it to diverging. So let's go ahead. What I got is I'm going to hook up a 24-volt power supply, and we'll just use that as a switch to turn this on and off and demonstrate how this works in actuating the switch. Now normally what we would do, instead of just hooking up a straight power supply, this is where we'd hook up an output to a PLC, or if you have a DCC controller, you could activate a relay output or a relay control that would turn this on and off with your power supply. So this effectively becomes your switch, which you can now control externally with some voltage of your choice. Just match the voltage of the coil. As you can see in this example that I showed you here, this one is actually a 120 volt coil. I wouldn't recommend using 120 volt, but you could. 120 volt simply turns this on. These are still the same voltages going into the box. This relay here is another style, and you can see that this is a 12 volt DC coil. You can find these in various voltages on eBay, and they sell for about anywhere from $2 to $3 each. Alright, here I have a 24 volt power supply, which is more than powerful enough to drive what I'm going to do. But this will be the power supply I'm going to use with my PLC to control these relays. But essentially, this is my switch. And you notice that this particular one indicates a plus and a minus. Normally, it doesn't matter which side you mark plus or minus, these will turn on. But in this case, I have it marked plus and minus because this has an LED. So if you have it backwards, the LED will not light. So what is this doing? What this is essentially doing, I don't know if the video will show this or not, but you can see that when I do this, there's a switch inside that moves back and forth. That switch sends signal to the box, which then in turn operates the switch. Now the best way to hook this up is if the power goes out or the relay, the 24 volt power supply goes out or the relay kicks out, the diverging switch will switch back to straight. So you have to turn this on and keep this on in order for it to stay in the switched position. So in this case, I have one box controlling one side of my Bachmann crossover, which isn't very useful because now I have to have another relay to do the other side. But it just so happens you can get these relays as a 4-pole double throw. Let me show you what that looks like. I don't know if you can see this, but you see now this shows 4 commons, 4 normally open, 4 normally closed, and 1 coil. So what this essentially does is now I have 2 boxes hooked up. So the nice thing about this is now I can control with one signal both of these boxes, and I should switch both at the same time. Okay, so doing the same thing again. I don't have a switch per se, but what I'm going to do is I will touch this as my switch on the relay. And you see this relay has a light on it as well. So when I do that, you see that my switches, I don't know if I can get them both in here so you can see them working simultaneously, but you see they both will switch at the same time with one control. The other nice thing is, I know I've seen online that if you try to switch these quickly back and forth, it takes a while. Especially, I've seen people, instead of using 2 boxes, use 1 box, double gang them up together, which does seem to work. But what I found is if I keep the 2 boxes separate, but just control them with one signal, I can get much stronger snap on the track, on the switch itself. And I don't have as much lag time. I can switch them quickly back and forth. So that's how I converted my Bachmann switches into an automation. By the way, these green cords here are not very long, so when they're in the back of your layout, it's hard to reach to the front where these switch boxes are, so you've got to cut and splice and do kinds of stuff like that with these. This little setup, I don't have to do any of that because these mount under the table in the right location where these green things are found. I've left these fairly short, but you could make these very long if you wanted to. Or, as in my case, I'm going to mount this close to the box, close to where the switch is. Of course, the wires will go down through the table. And then the long wire is just the control wire. I can make this whatever length I need to follow along the table. And in my wiring scheme, DC voltage is going to be blue. This is just a temporary, but typically blue for both the plus and the minus, or you could use blue and then black for the minus, but I'm going to use blue and then blue with the white stripe. That concludes how I converted these switches to an automation type switch.